All right, one second, guys.
Well, welcome to a live episode of the Epicenter podcast. And by the way, thanks to the BUIDL team for getting all these graphics up on such short notice. We literally decided to do this morning. So yeah, welcome to Epicenter, the show which talks about the technologies, projects, and people driving decentralization and the blockchain revolution. We're here today at BUIDL Europe. And before we get started, here's a word from our sponsors this week. And then through the magic of editing, we'll insert ads here. And now we may begin. Hi, guys. Thanks for joining me today. So we'll start with a brief round of introductions for this panel on DeFi and institutions. What happens to cypherpunk values when institutions start buying our bags? Slightly paraphrased, but basically the idea here is, is crypto at sort of an existential point where institutional adoption of crypto leads a lot of the ethos and values and principles that have driven all this innovation for the last 15 years. Does it throw a lot of those principles out the window? But yeah, we'll start with brief introductions to my right.
Hey guys, my name's Ben Lakoff. I'm actually based here in Lisbon, and I run Bankless Ventures, which is an early stage venture fund in the crypto ecosystem.
I'm Matthew Arrow. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Dark Forest. We advise on market microstructures and token liquidity to foundations and protocols within the crypto ecosystem.
Hi everyone, I'm Aurora Oriana. I work for Managing Director at G20 Strategies. We support a lot of blockchain protocols with market making. We do advisory, and we support for a lot of OTC services and treasury management, as well as asset management. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Richard Muirhead. I'm a managing partner at Fabric Ventures, and we have been kicking around in the space since about 2012, back a couple of hundred different projects, and seen a few crypto waves and seen a few waves of the last sort of decades. I also have one other kind of small hat, which is I'm on the board of Sovereign SBRN, which is spun out of the kind of near ecosystem. It's where I'm trying to keep my sword sharp from an operational perspective, because I kind of, from whence I came. Yeah.
Great. I don't know if you guys can hear yourselves, but I asked them to turn up the volume a bit so we can hear each other better. So before we start this conversation, I think one interesting question to perhaps get into is, like, what are the values that we actually want to defend as an industry, as people who have been building in the space for a long time, who came into the industry with aspirations of a world where interactions would be mediated by systems, where trust was minimized, where people had financial freedom, where perhaps even things like regulation, sanctions could be skirted. What are the values that we actually want to defend and want to sort of carry on into the next 10 to 15 years of crypto adoption as institutions becoming increasingly involved in the space?
I can kick off.
Go for it.
I think sort of self-custody is a key point, being able to have the option to look after your own assets, and certain sort of guardrails as well, where you can also exit a platform without permission. And I think having proper privacy and also visibility as well with the transactions, while also providing secure networks, I think is a really core thing.
Yeah, very important for fungibility as well. Because if you have assets on one platform that can only be traded or interacted with platforms that are approved or vetted, then fungibility sort of falls apart. Any other things that come to mind?
I think the big one for me is permissionlessness, and Eric Voorhees did a really good keynote at Permissionless conference a few years ago, but it was not having to ask permission to send money or deploy a smart contract or invest in different things. But I think that ethos for me is the biggest, most important aspect for me within the crypto world.
Yeah, and I would just echo what both of you have said. And I think if we're talking about cypherpunks, one of the earliest cypherpunks was probably Benjamin Franklin. And he had this great saying that I love, and he said, those who give up essential liberty for temporary safety deserve neither. And I think there's something there that can be applied to our space as well, and how we manage this merge and evolve into a more institutional-faced ecosystem, and preserving the permissionless space and preserving the privacy, and making sure we're not compromising too far on those values that we started.
Mm.
Yeah, so I think, you know, if we go back to it, the core principles of being a cypherpunk are, definitely openness. I don't know, I can maybe ask forgiveness, not permission. I always think, thought that maybe that would be a good title for a conference, actually, forgiveness. But and that, and privacy is a core part of that sort of sovereignty over yourself, and to be able to keep secrets and so forth. I think maybe tackling head on, this desire that was at the root from the romantic stages of our movement from Web3 to have kind of sovereignty over your money, self-custody, for example. And from that, I think it was sort of related to a desire not to be subject to the devaluation of fiat, for example. I think that some of that we just have to accept, that as the kind of pendulum swings from purely supporting the desires of the individual to dealing with the realities of institutions, that we're going to have to compromise on that a bit. And that, therefore, we're going to have on-ramps and off-ramps. We're going to have to deal with, KYC and so forth. And I think we all know, this is a trope that is going well throughout the industry already, that we want to have selective, revealing of information to make that possible. But I think that the question of having sort of sound money and being free from the grips of our kind of central banking overlords or whatever, I think that can only come if there's actually, we can get it with the movement we've got now, but it doesn't come by forcing it. It comes from competition between jurisdictions. That if a jurisdiction is bad, manages its kind of fiscal and monetary policy badly, if there's enough fluidity between different ecosystems, borderlessness, spanning nations, then that will get punished in a way that it wasn't before. But we've already seen with some of the rules, say around stablecoins in the UK, where they're restricting the amount that you, as an individual, as an institution, can hold. You're going to end up with caps. It's hard for governments to fight that instinct that they need to control, money flow.
Right. I think sovereignty is such a huge, and such an important part of the idea of being a cypherpunk, and many of the core values are sort of rooted in the idea of personal sovereignty and personal freedom, personal liberties, privacy, etc. As we all know, much of our financial transactions are intermediated by entities that are regulated. Those regulations, in large part, at least in Europe and the developed world, come from guidances that were issued by a shadowy group of people that sit in this organization called the FATF, which, if you don't know about the FATF, look it up, study the FATF. And the FATF is accountable to no one, is elected by no one, is effectively not even an organization. It's just sort of like a group of people that got together and decided, hey, we're going to create these rules for the world, and people will abide by them because we're also going to rate people or rate countries by their by the degree to which that they agree to these rules. And so there's sort of a racket happening here. Sorry, this is a really hot topic for me. So. But yeah, in that reality, in the reality of the the FATF regulated world, there's a tension between that, the desire to control financial flows, to control financial flows for reasons that may or may not even arrive to the goals of fighting terrorism and money laundering. I think in large part it doesn't. And and the individual freedom, the individual liberties of people to transact freely without caps, for instance. In France, you can't use cash for more than 3,000 euros. You can't pay transactions for more than a few thousand euros. So there's a tension there that it feels unresolvable. Where do we land? Is there a middle ground? And how do we, as an industry, as people who believe in freedom and personal liberties, continue to fight against this Goliath?
Well, I mean, I'll try and connect it to my previous thought. I think if you can choose to be within whichever platform or whichever nation you want, and you can kind of rage quit from it when you want, you can move your assets or some privacy preserved memory of what you've been doing, and you can take it with you. It's portable. Your value is portable, which is pretty easy these days, but preferably your kind of identity and your sort of data exhaust is also portable. If you can do that, then that encourages competition. And then I think the balance comes through competition between these different jurisdictions. That's how you square the circle. I mean, if you ask everybody individually where the balance should lie, of course you'll get a million different answers, and probably on a democratic basis, probably not a very good answer. But I think through competition, you've got a chance that both people are jurisdictions are held in check because people can leave. But also you should get segmentation and diversity. If you really don't like the way the balances have been struck in one space, you can go to another one, where there are fewer caps or it's more libertarian.
I was going to say, I think that's essential, is just maintaining that freedom of movement and choice. And, it's like you can please all the people half the time and half the people all the time, and you're never going to do a good job at that. And someone's never going to like the jurisdiction or the regulating body that they're living within or under. And but to maintain that freedom to move and say, okay, it doesn't suit me as a person. This doesn't line up with my ethos. I think that is, in this world of evolving cypherpunks to institutions and KYC and AML, it's likely inevitable if we want more mainstream adoption of this space. But then to maintain that freedom to say, okay, well, it's not working for me. I'm going to go here. And I think that's extremely valuable.
And we definitely observed it at Fabric over the years across Europe. Europe is all these incredible sort of old city-states with academia and these pockets of innovation and embracing of a sort of libertarian middle way and quite a lot of revolt directed towards extreme forms of government, typically in Europe. That created an opportunity, I think, around our space, around the Web3 and movement for a long period of time. And then governments competed to attract with benevolent sort of regulation, everyone from Malta to Switzerland to France to the UK to whatever. I think we then squandered that lead a little bit because it's always possible for people to pole vault, and through, you could argue, quite strong individual and statewide economic self-interest, the US just pole vaulted into the lead by saying we're just going to embrace this all super fast. But that's good now, as long as for Europe, I guess, as long as we wake up again and become increasingly competitive.
I like that idea of competition and kind of voting with your feet and being able, there's portability, but I think that the other thing to be cognizant of is like, this is a spectrum as well, is like all of us care about privacy in some way, shape, or form, but like I still use iMessage and I still use WhatsApp and I still like do Twitter DMs and stuff, and I'm not just pushing everybody to Signal and Proton Mail because of conveniences and stuff like that. So I think everybody kind of has their line and what they're willing to sacrifice on this like scale between cypherpunk and convenience, as you kind of alluded to as well.
I think, as to your point, I think people value privacy differently as well,
Right.
where to some people it's everything, and others they're willing to give a little bit of that away. I think sort of if you're looking more sort of the institutional side regarding privacy, they want the privacy on their clients, the privacy on the transactions, while still being able to be auditable to a degree, right? So everything's monitored, but they will give on a need-to-know basis. And so it's a bit of a fine line between, I guess, the cypherpunk, pure privacy ethos and how the institutions are adapting and within their guardrails and what will eventuate with that.
I think privacy is like one of those things that's been proactively ignored and retroactively appreciated. And we all have the benefit, well, most of us have the benefit of living in a society that we're not political dissidents and we're not enemies of the state. And, for all intents and purposes, we don't have anything to hide, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't value our privacy.
Mm-hmm.
And
It makes sense. But if you extend what you said, it's the classic, it's only once the horse has bolted that you remember to kind of close the barn door. From individuals in particular tend to be like that. And I was mentioning in the green room, whatever, if there was some kind of singular mantra within Fabric for the last few years, and I think it extends quite broadly within venture capital, it's that it's quite hard to sell privacy to any one individual, to get them to make that choice. They tend to be complacent. But reflecting on it a bit, and we'll see, I guess, what happens, shortly in our industry. But possibly for three reasons that might change. So one is the regulatory issue we're talking about here. You've got to have the on-off ramps, and we're in a situation where what do they call it, like a DeFi mullet, kind of like you got centralized at the front and sort of DeFi at the back. And I think there's a lot of, that makes sense because you can operate in a compatible way with today's markets. You can onboard the huge amount of assets that are not currently on industry, et cetera. So that's clearly forging ahead. Another one I think is around something that's a core plank of our thesis. Again, sorry, I keep talking about Fabric, but at Fabric, which is that the role for Web3 in a sense is to organize the world's data from the bottom up, to make it available to AI, the menagerie of AI kind of agents and models and so forth, to make them better. And we see that there's obviously this insatiable appetite for data. People should only be comfortable really sharing that information if they have privacy. If privacy is baked in. I was talking to a pretty illustrious venture investor this week about it. If you're gonna just default to letting your scales and your watch and everything give all of the data all the time and your genetics and the works, you want to trust that system and therefore know that there's some privacy. So I think that's the second reason privacy might kick in. And the third is this chat at the moment about how we all know that kind of block space is pretty commoditized in every sense, but that you can get a moat if. I think the phrase that Ali over at ACC uses is that you can export your value pretty quickly, but it's very hard to kind of export the secrets. So privacy can make a difference to constructing a defensible competitive moat for all the blockchains that exist today. So different stakeholders, I think, in the system now have a reason to start adopting privacy, which I think could mean that it really takes off. But I hope we still get the balance in terms of, it doesn't swing too far in the wrong direction.
Yeah. You want to say something? No. I mean, I think for privacy, I think institutions and broadly, the corporate world values privacy differently than individuals do. And I think I think in large part, maybe in large part, not in large part, but in some part, blockchains have not been adopted by the majority of the world's businesses because there is no privacy. And privacy is an essential component to, I think, capitalism, because it is like arbitrage is what makes capitalism kind of work. And you get that by having opacity in information. And so when we get privacy on blockchains, institutions and companies and sort of the corporate world gets benefit from that, but also individuals do because, well, let's hope so. Let's hope that individuals also get the benefit from it, because we may also end up in a sort of two-tiered world where, the powerful get their privacy, but, the weak do not. And so that would not be a great outcome.
But again, privacy means different things to different people and
Right.
institutions. And like blockchains by design are public, transparent, and permanent. So they're like the complete opposite of private by design. But like with an institution, I mean, it's like you were saying, there's like a few key things that they're worried about, and it can be not private to a few or a trusted party, and it doesn't have to be completely obfuscated all the way to like the cypherpunk values.
I mean, picking up your point about how institutions behave, yeah, I don't know how many people have spent time sort of selling to institutions. I mean, we've all dealt with bureaucracy, but I always like to reflect. It's like the individuals themselves can be, you know, very happy, or in fact excited about adopting a new technology, moving in a certain direction. But of course, you know, if you've got a compliance department or several departments, and basically your bonus or your job depends on not screwing this up,
Totally.
it never happens. And so we've been at that stage for a long period of time, and we're starting to see that now play out in a positive way. And I do think that's, if we can, well, regulation does that partly. If we can have privacy so that institutions can have arbitrage and can protect some of their intellectual property for at least for a period of time, so they can make money, that's going to drive things. But I do think it's an interesting point. If you think about it, we rely on kind of social consensus on privacy with large organizations currently, but whether it be Google, Meta, Bank of America, Barclays, or whatever, we're comfortable, we give up all of this information. The institutions have the ability to enforce a level of privacy, although they don't always do a great job of it for themselves or the customers. But actually, we have no privacy within those institutions. And we do have an opportunity right now with the technologies that have been coaxed into the mainstream by this, you know, our industry, CK, you know, HME, et cetera, you know, TEs, and long may the debates rage on Twitter as to which is the right thing for the right job. But it's, you know, we have an opportunity to tap into those, to also have privacy for the individual, to strike that balance. I hope we get those competitions so that emerges.
Well, I don't know if you saw this this news recently where someone within French tax authorities divulged information about sort of like some crypto founder in France to criminal networks that end up either kidnapping him or something like that. And I mean, you know, so like even within trusted institutions, we don't have, you know, there are incentives that make it such that even our privacy isn't protected. It sort of makes you want to not pay your taxes. But
For example.
not financial advice or tax advice, but
Well, it always reminds me of Travis. I mean, maybe it's apocryphal at this point. I seem to remember I read it probably, but when Travis Kalanick from you know, Uber was up there and accidentally switched into God mode on Uber. Do you remember that one? When he could see where.
oh
He
yeah.
could see where everybody was traveling.
Well, this is a fear, right? Because I think you kind of nailed one of the points, or the crux of the problem is that institutions are extremely risk adverse. If there's something that's going to jeopardize somebody's end-of-year bonus, they're not going to do it, regardless of the benefit it could provide. And the status quo of all these institutions right now is anti-privacy. So just complete transparency as much as possible, because this is how a lot of the Web 2 businesses have profited over the past couple of decades. Is, you know, Google invented this model of surveillance capitalism, and they just eat all the data they can and then sell this to others. Facebook then perfected it.
Yeah.
And then the fear is that this just kind of continues and grows. And as you said, then Uber has this God mode, and you know, where does it go?
I agree. The flip side of that risk aversion that folks in companies have is that if they smell a profit or a small piece of their contribution to a profit, which in itself may not look totally evil, they will do it. But then 10 or 100 of them do it, and in total, that can be quite evil as an outcome, as we know. I think that's interesting, I think, you know, I had this epiphany at one point that kind of like, you want privacy so that you have, in a sense, and some people use this term, your own backpack of information and money and so forth. And then you want that backpack to be portable so that you can take it somewhere else. And we were talking about that, you know, we want that fluidity. And I think that, and for me, the epiphany story I had was that portability is basically the flip side of the coin from composability. So it's not just important to the individual that you're able to flip around like that and create competition, but it's also essential for innovation because, in talking about what do we want to preserve as we find the correct blend between institutions and individuals, one key part of it is composability. We want to, for the developers to not have to ask permission for how they compose, their applications from different existing components. So I think they all tie together, like, privacy, backpack, portability, composability. That's the thing that we want to get right.
And I think this is where you might start seeing more sort of the DeFi infrastructure supporting institutions. So they're going to be taking the efficiencies, but there'll be guardrails around the edges where there's the guardrails to tick the regulatory boxes, but things are going to become more efficient. For instance, say atomic settlement, a lot of the other things that DeFi has created. And if it creates more efficiency and more money for the institutions, then they'll use those infrastructures to their advantage.
Well, I'd like to maybe shift a little bit the conversation to DeFi, because we've talked a lot about privacy and freedom, which I think are super interesting. But on the DeFi side, if we look at volume broadly, like across crypto, most exchange volume is done on centralized exchanges and not on DEXs, not on AMMs, and most of the lending as well, and sort of leverage happens on centralized exchanges. Is this an indicator that DeFi has failed to deliver that promise of efficiency? And if not, I see you shaking your head. Then what is the utility of DeFi, and like what efficiencies will institutions, traditional finance institutions, and sort of global finance take away from DeFi in order to provide more efficient, better systems, global systems, permissionless, et cetera, like all of these things that we're...
Well, I think sort of I alluded before, these, atomic settlement, so instant settlement rails, and sort of the speed as well, and how the infrastructure can really support a lot of the new transactions that are taking place across the board. Obviously, the volumes are not comparable with the centralized exchanges, and a lot of that is for regulatory requirements and the KYC component of it for the onboarding. So I think it's a lot of the tech stacks that will be implemented on the back end with the institutions.
Yeah, I think that infrastructure continues to get better. UI, UX continues to get better, and these used to be bigger bottlenecks. But if it's on a blockchain, it's censorship resistant, and you can self-custody your assets. And centralized exchanges work great until they don't. I mean, there's Roger Ver that used to say, like, treat centralized exchanges like a public restroom. Mm-hmm. Get in, do your business, try not to touch anything and get out as quickly as possible. But I think, now these like more trusted institutions that are publicly traded, et cetera, but they're still centralized. And I think that there's like a blending of the two. Like Richard had mentioned the DeFi mullet, so there could be this like centralized front end with decentralized back end. For example, like Coinbase with the Morpho integration. Mm-hmm. This has been live since April 2025. So they launched this. If you have Bitcoin on Coinbase, Bitcoin sitting on Bitcoin network presumably, but like you click a button and it's wrapped on Ethereum as CBBTC, and then you borrow against it on Morpho, completely under the hood. But like people don't know what's happening, and try to do that on your own, even with the UX and wallet advances that we have today. That would be a very arduous process, and you'd probably lose it in the process. But you can borrow against your Bitcoin at 6%, which is super competitive with any centralized provider lending against your Bitcoin. So things like this that are kind of blending the both, but it's really this DeFi mullet with DeFi underneath the hood.
So centralized exchanges, or the institutions capitulated onto the centralized exchanges because they have the order book that they know and love, these CLOBs. And it's just because centralized exchanges are not familiar with AMMs, and going back to this risk adverseness of institutions, or the institutions aren't familiar with the AMM models. And since they're risk adverse, they're naturally going to keep the distance. And I think, as you're saying, with these hybrid DEXs that have the CLOB on the front end and on-chain settlement on the back end, this is going to be the first introduction of institutions to DEXs, and then it's only a matter of time until the institutions start to understand the efficiencies of operating on a DEX versus a centralized exchange, and then it's evolution over time and more order flow, and we're living in the halcyon days of centralized exchanges, but I think within 5 years this flips, and we see DEXs taking the lion's share of the volume and the liquidity of the crypto markets.
But outside of crypto, would you like would this 5-year timeline also apply to, say, like London Stock Exchange and other big market venues? Like
everything, maybe 6 years. Maybe we'll push it to 6 years. I mean, like you hear Brian Armstrong talking about being the everything exchange at Coinbase, and I think Coinbase and others coming from different directions are competing to provide that very important intuitive onboarding for individuals and then others for institutions as well. I think that front of the mullet, it's got to be easy to use. It's got to satisfy governments, and then I think it's not just about the efficiencies at the back end. I think it's clear that obviously stablecoin settlements, that's just going to how it's going to happen. It's going to be baked in everywhere as a stack. And it's clear that all the kind of deposits and other assets are going to be tokenized. And then it's clear that those are going to be rehypothecated into all sorts of different other instruments. And so it's efficiency, but it's also capability. And in that context, I'm not wanting to bring it back too much to privacy again, but you've got to, I think, trust implicitly at a kind of protocol level. If you're going to, basically you're unleashing the machines to do great work with your finances. You can't, there's almost kind of no halfway house, because once you let them go do it, they're going to go and do it. And so you better trust that the information you've shared, A, keeps government happy, but B, doesn't embarrass you.
what do you think are the biggest blockers to institutional adoption of DeFi tech? And I'm not just talking about crypto institutions, I'm talking about TradFi institutions, like BlackRock's, Fidelity, et cetera. I mean,
I think a big component of that quite often is legacy systems. So a lot of the big institutions have a lot of legacy systems. It's even hard to upgrade Windows, for instance, quite often. This is how internally the tech stacks are just not up to date with the current technologies. And I think there's going to be internal push how to adopt these blockchain technologies, or potentially have sort of add-ons on the side where they're not able to add on to their existing stacks, and they'll have to do something on the side to accommodate and to keep up with competition. And it's kind of like, can you get that first mover advantage? You'd mentioned sort of the tokenized deposits. Well, that, Citi sort of did the tokenized deposits as an initial. They're talking about stable coins, but it's sort of still under consideration. So the banks are heavily looking into it, but there's a lot of incumbent problems to face. And it's a matter of time before they will, when they see there's a financial opportunity and they're going to be losing business to competitors. But it takes time.
Wells Fargo's logo is still a horse and buggy. And a lot of the TradFi institutions still are working on decommissioning mainframes. So I think there's a long way to go.
so maybe not 6 years, maybe more like 7.
For some of the other institutions, I think you start to see it though. Yeah.
I'd also add, like, the reduction in career risk for like proposing these things and adopting these things has decreased dramatically. Like you don't get fired for buying IBM sort of situation, but like everybody was talking about stable coins and how much more efficient they are, and they're gonna eat the world, all of this. But it wasn't until like the Genius bill was passed that all the big major players started launching stable coins. So there was this bit of like career risk as well as like the regulatory risk. And as these things like get a little bit more clear, then more people are even more open to adopting these things, but it will be slow.
And I think also another one is the reputational risk, right? These institutions have been around a long time, and reputation is everything. And quite often they might make investments into these other projects or exchanges,
Oh yeah.
but not have their brand name on the actual products.
I was just going to agree with you, like 100%. How you're perceived if you propose this thing has totally changed. It was like a whole bunch of decentralization and blockchain theater until about 12 months ago.
Larry
And I know
Fink,
you
the
were-
economist, talking about tokenization of everything,
Totally.
right?
But you were, I think, at Abu Dhabi Finance Week, which I think actually should have been called Abu Dhabi Crypto and
Tokenization.
AI.
Yeah,
I mean, really, finance is almost sort of a sideshow. Maybe it should be a sideshow, but
Well, I mean, it's to your point, right? Like crypto and AI are eating finances.
and so I think the Wells Fargos of the world, they're held back by their logo and their pace of innovation. And if I ask the horses, they tell me to get different riders or whatever the phrase was. You know what I mean? And if and they're held up by kind of bad systems, and I sadly have wrestled with some of those in my past. But I think right now you've got, because of how things have fallen into place and the catalysts that have fallen into place, you've got everyone from Aave to Robinhood to Coinbase to Kraken to Bank of America, probably JP Morgan. All there are a few segments to be addressed, but to be doing on-chain banking writ large for individuals, wealthy individuals, SMEs, enterprises, governments, whatever, and I think it's just a tsunami of competition. And hopefully that's good for us.
So final question here. Basically, like, we're here. It's the beginning of 2026. Our industry has changed tremendously in the last year, and with acceleration in stablecoin adoption, regulatory clarity also has really kind of been propelled over the last 12 months, which we wanted. Now it's here, right? What does it mean to be a cypherpunk in 2026? Like, what are the, as an industry, how should we be interacting with institutions? Should we be interacting with institutions? Is perhaps a question some people are asking themselves, but like, what does it mean to be a cypherpunk in 2026?
I think it's agency, just having a high degree of agency, and maintaining that and presenting that and acting upon that, and being flexible and malleable, but not compromising on certain points that are valuable to your personal philosophies in life, but exhibiting a high degree of agency, I would say, is.
I'd second that. I think the agency is key. And, for the ones that want to maintain their privacy. And
I think it depends who you talk to. If you're talking to like a true cypherpunk, they'd say it means exactly what it always has meant.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe more to your second question of like, how should we interact with institutions? I mean, I think we'll continue to have more traditional finance, institutional players enter into the space. I mean, Morgan Stanley just launched Bitcoin and ETFs yesterday. Like, more and more people, that this career risk has gone down, they want to get involved bigly. So adhering to kind of what started this space and like kind of the ethos that was very important early on, but like also accepting that it's evolving, and we have new players that have entered the arena.
I mean, I think, at the heart of the cypherpunk movement, actually, I think is philosophically a romanticism. And I think, I don't want to kind of call it kind of the end of history, but I think, maybe we hope it is, there's this sort of struggle between institutions and individual that's been taking place, or indeed between the left and right wing kind of politics. And the cypherpunk was wanting to kind of take a kind of a more central path of sort of a third way and preserve the rights of the individual. I'm hoping that what was rolling out now, and I think the genie is out of the bottle in terms of the tokenization of everything and hyper-tokenization, whatever you want to call it, I'm hoping that, in a sense, that's been addressed. But given that the whole point was, holding romantic ideals aloft, that the cypherpunk will find something else that needs to be addressed. It doesn't need to be yesterday's battles.
Thank you so much, and thanks to all of you for listening in, and enjoy the rest of the evening. Cheers.